Before I start, I'd just like to throw a couple quick shout-outs. The first one to my amazing sibling who's sitting in the front row, and the second one to the students in the Ask program. I want to let you all know that you are seen. That being said, I love where I'm from. Seriously. Anybody who knows me knows that it's the only thing I ever talk about. The sweet sounds of bachata and merengue wrapping around you as you listen to the dialectical mix of English and Spanish, and you look to your right, and there's two old men with brown skin who have been playing dominoes for what's probably been 3 or 4 hours at this point. I love the city of Lawrence, Massachusetts, but I also love everywhere I've ever lived in my life. And that is a lot of places, by the way. I was originally born in, and I grew up in for the first part of my life, in a city called Haverhill, Massachusetts, on Emerson Street, the Hood. Growing up in that yellow house, I can't remember it too well, but I'm pretty sure that it was a crack house. I remember every so often there would be knocks on the door next door, and from the police, and the next thing I know, the person would move out not too long after that. Now, luckily, we didn't stay in that place for too long, and we ended up moving in with my grandparents. My mom and my dad never really had very much money, and so we needed the opportunity to save up a bit of a nest egg. And luckily, my grandparents had a little bit of stability. They both had good jobs. So what ended up happening from there is we saved up money, and I got to know my grandparents better, and I ended up starting school at a school called Hillview Montessori Charter Public School. But we didn't stay in Haverhill too long, because then we moved into Bradford. Now, Bradford was a great time. There was a public pool. A lot of my friends from middle school lived there, and I knew a lot of people that lived there besides that fact. And so during that time that I spent in Bradford, I must have spent about 1,000 hours swimming in that public pool. I must have got a million splinters from walking outside barefoot when my mom told me not to, but I did it anyway. And I also went on approximately one joyride with my older cousin Omar, where I told my parents that I felt bad, but in reality I didn't because it was really fun. But this time that I spent in Bradford was a little bit of a facade. And the reason why I say that is because when I wasn't swimming, when I wasn't getting those splinters on my feet, and when I wasn't going on joyrides, when it was night and my parents thought that my sister and I were asleep, when the lights were off, and I put my ear to the door, I would hear my parents saying something, and they kept saying the word cancer. And I didn't fully understand what the word cancer meant. But I just know that not too long after that, my mom walked up to me, it might have been a week after, something along those lines, and she said, "Emilio, I'm currently suffering from stage 4 breast cancer." And I didn't know what that meant. I must have been about 7 or 8 at this point. She handed me a pamphlet and a book and said that she was going to start losing hair and losing weight. And I didn't fully understand what that meant, but I just knew that I was there for the ride. And at the same time my mom was diagnosed with cancer, my dad had actually, so he originally owned a business. He owned a place called Diamond Auto Detailing. And at the same time that she was diagnosed with cancer, he actually lost Diamond Auto Detailing. And so what ended up happening was we had this stability, we had this nice place that we were living, but we lost it all. So we ended up moving back in with my grandparents. And for a time, this was actually pretty nice. Like I said, my grandparents had a stability, they both had jobs, and so we were able to be secure. But when my mom started to get really sick, my dad's mental health also started to slip. And he got worse and worse. And he was arguing with my grandparents more and more. And so whenever there was an argument, I think both my sister and I knew that we had to go upstairs and we wouldn't deal with it. And the arguments never lasted very long. It would maybe be 5 minutes, maybe 10. But we always knew that the argument would subside after a brief moment. But there was one night, one cold night in December that I remember, that the argument went on for 5 minutes. And then it went on for 10 minutes, and then 15, and 20. And I've never been sure about this decision that I made, but I decided to go downstairs. I still blame myself for this a little bit. Because when I went downstairs, the first thing my dad said to me was, "We're leaving," because he had gotten kicked out. And my dad, being the type of man that he was, or is rather, when he gets kicked out, we all got kicked out. So we packed our bags, and it was cold, like I said, it was December in Massachusetts. And I can't remember exactly what happened that night. We either slept in the truck, which we so affectionately called Bruno or Snowflake, or we ended up moving into a place called the Naughty Pine Motel in Salisbury, Massachusetts. Now, Salisbury, Massachusetts, for anybody who's been to Massachusetts, is actually a really beautiful place. If you have property there or you just travel there, you can go on vacation there, it's great. It's a beach, there's a boardwalk, you can have a lot of fun. I did it a lot growing up. But when you're in between homelessness, having a home, and looking at the beach and all these people having fun, and having to drive really far to go to school every day, not being sure where your next meal is coming from, it can be very difficult. And so I remember that there was a time on Nickelodeon where the only episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender they showed, because it was a new show, was episode 3, The Southern Air Temple, where Aang goes home for the first time and realizes that after 100 years, everybody that he knew who lived back then has passed away or left him behind, and that he also lost his home because it's been destroyed. And I don't know why, but I remember me and my sister would sit there every single time and watch that episode again and again, no matter how many times it aired. I can't think of a more apt metaphor for what was going on in our lives during that time. Now, luckily, my dad had a connect in the city that I mentioned at the start of this speech, Lawrence, Massachusetts. And we were able to find a condominium that looked really nice on the outside, but was kind of falling apart on the inside, that was in a really bad part of town, right behind a nightclub. And I really loved this place. It was a lot of fun. It had like 3 floors, and so we had the opportunity, my sister and I, to grow a little bit. It felt like we had a bit of stability. But at the same time, there was a lot of complex things that were going on in the back, because my mom had beaten cancer for the first time, but then she relapsed. And so while all of this was going on, sometimes I went to bed behind that nightclub hearing arguments, not being sure whether or not I was hearing fireworks during the 4th of July or gunshots. And I found myself wondering what was next for me. And so what ended up happening was I realized that the key to getting out, the key to changing my life, was education. And so I started working harder in middle school. I spent time on my studies, and I made sure that I got to know myself better and that I tried harder. And so what ended up happening was in 8th grade, when it was finally time to apply, I had found a series of schools that I really cared about. And the top one that I truly cared about it's called Governor's Academy in Byfield, Massachusetts. I was in love with this school. So I sent in my application and was really happy when I discovered that I had gotten an interview. I'm pretty sure everybody got an interview, but for me it felt like a big deal. And I remember I went to the interview with my mom and my grandma, both of the strongest women that I know, by the way. And when we got there, they were holding hands the whole time. And as we stopped and we looked at the wonderful scenery and we took in a breath of fresh air and felt like we could smell the years of generational wealth accumulating, we realized that this was the place where my life would change. But they kept holding hands. And they made good friends with the person at the front desk, because they're both the most charismatic people that I knew as well. And so while they were hitting it off with the front desk lady, I was in the back focusing and trying to prepare for the interview that was coming up. And so when I was finally called to the back for the interview, I kept thinking about the fact that they were holding hands and they never let go. And during the interview, I realized that it was because they were praying for me. Because they were praying that this was going to be the chance that I had. That this was going to be the chance that I had to make my story and change my life. That I was going to be able to change everything. That I wasn't going to have to deal with the homelessness, with the poverty, with the fact that my mom was getting more sick and my dad's mental health was declining. That this is where everything changes. And so for about a brief moment, I turned into a diamond. And that was the best interview I've ever given in my life. I wish that I could do the same thing now that I'm older, but alas, 13 was where I peaked. And so we left, feeling confident, taking one look back, and we waited. And so after 3 or 4 weeks, we got a letter in the mail. And I had already run upstairs, as I always did, way in front of my mom. And my mom had beaten cancer again, but now had relapsed for the 3rd time. And so her body was falling apart, and she wasn't able to do things as well as she used to. She could still drive, but she was really slow to go up the stairs. And so one day she drove me back home, and we saw that there was a letter from Governor's Academy in the mail. She said, "Emilio, we have a letter." And so I sprinted back downstairs, took the letter, and ran upstairs and totally left her behind. And I was about to open it, and then I realized that she was going to take a while. So I walked back downstairs, leaving the letter on the table, and I grabbed her by the hip, as I always did, and slowly brought her back up the stairs until we made it to the top, and I guided her to the table, and we opened it. And we were both so excited, because we knew, like I had said, that this was the chance that I had to change my life. And so we open it, and we read it over, and it looks amazing. There's a bunch of really great words that are really encouraging in it, but there's one word that we don't fully understand. Waitlisted. I never got into Governor's Academy. Now, I had gotten into some other Catholic schools that were pretty good. I'm not going to call any schools out, but there was one school in the Lawrence area that cost about $12,000 a year that offered me financial aid, $6,000. And when I spoke to the president and filled out an application to get more financial aid, they gave me $1,000, which they gave me an extra $1,000, so I had $7,000, which, to be honest, felt more like a rejection than the wait list did. But the most important moments in life aren't always dramatic. And the most important moment of my life was just that, completely normal. One day, my dad walked to a local bodega and saw that one of the symbols on a worker's shirt had said NDCR. And he said to her, he said, "What does that mean?" To which she had responded to him and said, Notre Dame Cristo Rey. And this was a very important 4-letter acronym for me. Because he came back after he learned about the school, and he realized that Notre Dame Cristo Rey High School is a high school that's very affordable to students such as myself. And now, the reason for that is both incredibly complex and incredibly simple. It's incredibly simple because there's a 4-letter acronym that explains why it's able to be so affordable. The Corporate Work Study Program, CWSP. But it's incredibly complex because that 4-letter acronym is also the most incredible solution to anything I've ever seen in my life. So what ends up happening is students who attend Notre Dame Cristo Rey are able to work 1 to 2 days a week in order to help pay off their tuition. This meant that I was able to go to a school with competitive academics in the area for about $1,000 a year, which was very affordable for my family on top of the scholarship that I had received, which meant that I was barely paying anything. And the 1 to 2 days a week that I worked were also incredibly important for me as I grew up, because that meant that by the time that I had graduated during my senior year, I had worked 4 internships at great companies. The first was Nuance Communications, which is a tech firm. The second one is Arcule Inc., which is a cancer research company. The third one is Emerson Ecologics, which was a health company. And then the fourth one, you guys all know this, is Keurig Green Mountain, where I got to drink a lot of coffee, and I got to be really caffeinated because they had a huge coffee wall, which was great. But before I could even start any of that work that I had there, I had to attend a 2-week training seminar. And during this 2-week training seminar, I had the chance to learn how handshakes worked, which I was really bad at first. I learned how to talk to a room full of people that's way smarter than me, such as this one. And I also learned a little bit about being timely. Now, the president of my high school had a saying, Sister Mary Alice, saying, if you're on time, you're late, and if you're early, you're on time. And this really stuck to me because I remember the first time that I was late for anything at Notre Dame Cristo Rey. It was the last day of the summer training program, and my mom had a really bad night. Now, when my mom had a bad night, I had a hard time sleeping because I always tried to make sure that she was okay. So I showed up to school 40 minutes late because I had woken up, and I always walked to school because my dad was out doing whatever. And by the time I had made it, Sister Mary Alice was the only person left at the school. And so she drove me in complete silence for 40 minutes. And by the time I had gotten about 30 minutes into the ride, I had cracked. I realized that this was her tactic for making me talk. So I simply said to her, as I just said to you all, my mom had a bad night. Her lung collapsed, and we're not sure if she's going to survive. Now, I don't remember what she said to this, but we just had a conversation 7 years later, and she said that this conversation has stuck to her more than almost any other conversation she's ever had during the time at school. And I never would have thought that 7 years in the future, I could have an impact that was even close to the impact that she had on me. Because Sister Mary Alice ended up becoming one of my closest mentors. And she taught me about the importance of mentorship during my time in high school. And it was because of her, and because of the Corporate Work Study Program, that I was able to succeed and thrive during my time in high school. I had so many mentors, Deb Wall, Tony Messina, Tanya Georges, people who came to my house and believed in me and taught me to go beyond when it felt like I didn't have anything left. These people inspired me, but they also taught me to become a mentor for other people. Because while my mom was passing away, and while my dad's mental health was slipping, and when I felt like I had nothing left, these people were the ones that I turned to, and they were the ones who let me become the person that you all see before you today. These people, like I had mentioned, Tony Messina, Deb Wall, Sister Mary Alice, they're the reason why I'm able to speak to you all and give a TED Talk. And they're the reason why I've been thriving. So my message to all of you for this talk that I have, which has been such an honor, is to always try your hardest to become somebody's mentor. Because as I said, 7 years later, since I started attending Notre Dame Cristo Rey, and not too long, almost 3.5 years after I graduated, A lot has happened. My mom passed away, surrounded by the people that she loves, breathing her last breath in a wonderful hospice room. I ran away from my father and ended up living with my grandparents. Of course, I got into Georgetown, and now I'm a senior. But I also have worked 2 internships during my time at Georgetown, the first with the Department of Education, and the second with Instagram, where I'll be working full-time next year. And one of the things that I really want to impart is that the most important piece of growing up for me was education. And I feel like a younger version of myself would attribute the success that I've had today with my own skill, with the things that I put together, with how hard I worked. But I realize now that if it wasn't for those people who came together and believed in me when it felt like I had nothing left, that I wouldn't be half the man that I am. And so it is because of mentorship that I'm able to be here and to succeed beyond all measures. And so I want everybody to know that if you all become a mentor for somebody else, you can change somebody's life, just as my life was changed by those who believed in me. Thank you very much.